In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. We've been in the orbit of Easter for almost a third of a year now. 40 days before Easter, Lent began. That's 40 days, and that's not counting the Sundays. So with the Sundays, that's 47 days. Then came the 50 days of Easter. So now we're up to 97 days. And the first Sunday after the end of the Easter season, last Sunday, is always Trinity Sunday. So we add now in 7 more days. So that's 104 days. It's almost a third of a year that Easter has been driving our readings and our prayers and our hymns and all the rest of our liturgy. But now, a third of the year having passed, it's time to get back to normal until the end of November. And that's when this Christmas cycle begins. That's when we come to Advent. So today, we begin that part of the year when we read through one of the Gospels in an orderly fashion. And that's why this time of the year is sometimes called ordinary time. Not plain time, but ordered time. Each year we read through one of the Gospels in order during this ordered, ordinary time. And this year it's the Gospel of Luke. Next year it will be the Gospel of Matthew, and the year after that it will be the Gospel of Mark, and then that cycle just goes on and on and on until Jesus comes again. So today we heard a portion of Luke chapter 8. Next week we'll hear a portion of Luke chapter 9, and the week after that a portion of Luke chapter 10, and so it will go until we come to Advent. So, that's how the Gospels work during this green time in this nice, orderly, ordered way. But what I want us to notice today is not the Gospel. What I want us to notice today is the Old Testament reading. The Old Testament reading and how that is chosen. So in our lectionary, the lectionary is the system by which the readings are spun out across the year. When our lectionary was devised a long time ago, each of these Gospels in ordinary time, in green time, was paired with an Old Testament reading that somehow related to it. The Old Testament reading each week somehow relates to the Gospel reading. So the Old Testament reading each week is sort of a window into understanding the Gospel, or maybe looking at it the other way around. The Gospel is a window into understanding what's happening in the Old Testament. So, okay, now I'm going to stop being a liturgy professor. I gave that job up about 10 years ago, and I'm going to become a preacher now. So let me become a preacher. So who is this Gerasene demoniac that we heard about in the Gospel today? He was a tormented man. He was crazy because there were so many voices in his head. We just heard Luke's version of this story, but Matthew and Mark have their own version of this story. And in Mark's version of the story, the man threw himself against stones. He just threw himself over and over against sharp stones, cutting himself and bruising himself. And so this Gerasene demoniac, was he like the people in our day who cut themselves just so they'll feel something, so they'll feel like they have some control over their lives? Wasn't that this man who injured himself so he'd feel like he had some control over his life? Because the voices in his head controlled him, didn't they? Was he maybe what we might call today a schizophrenic? For a long time, this man had worn no clothes, Luke tells us. And Luke didn't see this as a sign of liberation, like being on a nude beach. Jesus died naked for everyone to see, because that's how it was with convicted criminals and slaves in that day. They were stripped of their clothing so that they would have no defense. They were just naked before the world. Was this man a man that everyone saw as being really like a slave or a convict, maybe? So as I sat with this gospel this week, I asked myself over and over, and I thought that it was important for me to ask you, how am I this man? And how are you this man, this Gerasene demoniac? How do you feel stripped bare every day of your life? Are there voices in your head, voices probably from a very long time ago, that tell you over and over and over again without ceasing how worthless you are? And then there are the tombs. He lived in the tombs, it says. He wasn't fit to live with living people. He was made to live with dead people. Because really, he was dead. This man was dead. And so this week, as I prayed over this text, I said to myself, how do I feel dead? Pat, how do you feel dead? And I thought, I need to ask these people, these brothers and sisters of mine, how do you feel dead? Really dead from the inside out. So that's where my mind went this week as I worked with this text. And I thought, just as Jesus offered this demoniac life, how is he offering to give each of us life? And my mind turned again and again to me and to each one of you, each of you as individuals, to my personal relationship with Jesus, the freedom that he wants to give me, the life he wants to give me. And I thought of your relationship with Jesus. How does he want to give you life and freedom? So that's what I was doing with that gospel passage all this week. And then I looked at the Old Testament reading. I looked at the Old Testament reading because I knew that it would have something to do with this gospel passage. And the people who paired these readings up all those many years ago were much smarter than I am and much smarter than I will ever be. And so I thought, this Old Testament reading will give me a window into what this gospel is really about, this reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when I did that, I realized that when Luke wrote this story of the Gerasene demoniac, he was not at all thinking about this the way I was thinking about it. He wasn't thinking about some tormented man. Luke was thinking about a tormented society. He was thinking about a tormented culture. So take your orders of worship and open them to page 5. Again, we're going to pretend now that we're in sort of an old-fashioned Bible church, and we're going to do some work with this text. So look now, open your orders of worship and look on page 5. And look at the passage from Isaiah there, and look how it begins. God says to Israel, I said, here I am, to a nation that did not call on my name. I held out my hands all day long to a rebellious people who walk in a way that is not good. So what is God saying to the nation of Israel? You have never wanted me, even though you are the only thing I have ever wanted. Here I am, I'm right here for you, and you don't want anything to do with me. You don't even notice me. And how many of us have ever been in love with someone when we felt that way? They don't even notice me, and I am so in love with him. Now, look halfway down that first column of the reading, and look at how Isaiah describes the nation of Israel, this people that God was in love with. but a people that God did not even get a second look from. Look at what Isaiah has God saying about Israel. God says, these people are those who sit inside tombs and spend the night in secret places, who eat swine's flesh with broth of abominable things in their vessels, who say, keep to yourself, do not come near me. This is the story of the Gerasene demoniac. It's not really a story about a person. It's a story about a nation living in the tombs. Not a single person living in the tombs, but a nation living in the tombs. The story of the Gerasene demoniac is a story of a people telling God to mind God's own business. It's the story of a people wanting to cozy up with pigs, and you know what pigs are to Jewish people. It's a nation who would rather cozy up with the pigs than cozy up with the God who loved them. And the people who would have heard the story of the Gerasene demoniac, the people who Luke was writing to, they would have known the book of Isaiah. It would have been all in their heads, just like pop music is in our heads. They knew this poem. And so when they heard the story of the Gerasene demoniac, they would have automatically thought of Isaiah. And they would have realized this is not about an individual person. This is about all of us. This is about the nation. So now let's go back and look at the story of the Gerasene demoniac again and hear it the way the people of Luke's day would have heard this story. So God is drawing near again. Again, God is drawing near to a people who have again and again rejected God. In Jesus, God is drawing near to this people who keeps rejecting them. And what do they say? Go away, don't bother me. But God is courting you again, you nation of Israel, like a foolish, star-eyed lover. God knows that you are so self-absorbed that you don't even see God. But here God is again, hoping this time, when God draws so close, O Israel, you will notice. And what does God say when he draws near? I love you, God says to Israel. This evil government you are in bed with wants you to die. The Romans have turned your nation into a tomb. Come out of the tomb and live. You are under the control of Legion, and for those of you, you know this. Legion was the name of the groups in the Roman army. They were called legions, like we would talk about battalions. They were called legions. You are under the control of Legion. You are under the control of the military, but you don't have to be. You can be free. The government that controls you killed Jesus, but Jesus was stronger than the government. Life is stronger than death. Let Jesus be your Caesar. This government is making you live in the tombs. It is strangling the very life out of you. But God will send it to hell with the pigs. You just have to ask. This time you really can be free. So that's what the people of Luke's day might have heard when they heard the story of the Gerasene demoniac, knowing as they did this passage from Isaiah 2,000 years ago. June 23rd, 2019. What cemetery has Jesus found us in today? How is our culture dealing death? Do we want Jesus to set us free from all of this madness? And as Luke says of the Gerasene demoniac, do we want Jesus to put us back in our right minds? At the end of Luke's story, when the people saw what a liberated man looked like, really what a liberated nation looked like, They were scared to death. They didn't want to live in a God-liberated culture. The people of Jesus' day were no different than the people of Isaiah's day. The idea of being free scared them to death. Listen again to what we hear in the gospel. Then the people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. Well, of course they were seized with great fear. A society in its right mind, a nation in its right mind, scares the hell out of people. To continue with Jesus' metaphor about this hellish thing that has taken possession of the people. But that nonetheless is what God offers us, to finally be in our right minds. For as long as people have known the God of Israel, that is what God has been offering them, to be free and to be in their right minds. And Jesus offered it to the people of his day, and it scared them. And Jesus offers it to us. Jesus wants to bring us out of the tombs and clothe us like free and respectable people and return us to our right minds. The question is, do we want what Jesus is offering? Let our words be the words that come at the end of today's psalm. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall bow before him. For kingship belongs to the Lord. He rules over the nations.